Marcia asked me to bring a short reflection on some of my experiences in teaching. I spent most of my adult life teaching at the university level, but my first two teaching assignments were terrifying. As a new graduate student living on the East Coast and in a big city for the first time, life had changed dramatically for me. I was then asked to teach an introductory course in geography, my field, in the evening college. Nearly everyone in the class was at least a decade older than I. I was 22. And many worked for companies that would pay their tuition if they earned at least a C. It was intimidating. Then I moved to Eugene. The department, pointing out that nearly all jobs for geographers were in teaching, felt we should find out quickly if this was a career for us. So once again, into the evening college, teaching a course in the geography of Oregon. Now, at that point, I had spent almost 5 months in Oregon. I had seen I-5 from the California line to Eugene. And of course, virtually all of the students were from Oregon. Talk about intimidating. But I survived and found out that I really loved the interaction with the students. I taught at Cal State Northridge in Los Angeles, an urban campus. The students were all urban. And so I tried to relate the concepts we were teaching to things that were in their experience and to get them out of the classroom as often as possible. That meant a lot of field trips. Most classes had at least a Saturday visit to a nearby natural area or even exploring the city that we lived in. For many of my advanced students, this meant long weekends at a desert research station or a field station on Santa Cruz Island off the coast from Santa Barbara. Many of my students had never been off a paved road, knew little of their city except how to get to the beach at Malibu. So I hope I got through to some of them that the whole world is their classroom. If I could get them critically asking questions, then I felt my work was done. As Maria Montessori said, the greatest sign of success for a teacher is to be able to say, "The children are now working as if I did not exist."
First, I have to say it was a little bit of a nasty trick to ask someone who was used to writing 3-hour lectures to give a 5-minute reflection. I also think it was a little bit of a nasty trick to do this a year after I stopped teaching. Because this was a little bit of it was a really deep reflection for me. This is a reflection I think I needed. I was a college professor for 8 years, and I was a school psychologist working in public schools for 3.5 years. So I spent almost 12 years working in education, and I left a year ago to stay home with my kiddos who are 8 and 6 and 2. And as I did this reflection, I really thought about what is it, sorry, I gotta keep track of time or I can't do this. What is it that I need to say? Because of course my first thought is, what do I want you to hear? But then I realized I really needed this for me. And so what I started doing was making a list of all the things that I missed about working in education. And I've been very focused on what I moved toward. I moved toward my family as opposed to what I left, right, which was my teaching. And so I think that's why this was a really helpful and sort of deep, reflective chance for me. So here are some of my I misses. I miss watching a student when something clicks. I miss the uncomfortable silence when the wheels are turning and then one student takes a chance and then another. I miss the performance of it. It's like I'm an actor, right? But it comes from an authentic place, right? And it's this performance that's this balance of the content you're giving, what you're doing with engagement and activity and thought and reflection and demonstration. And it has to go together, right? Because if you have that content but no engagement, it's boring, right? And if you have just engagement and activity without content, it doesn't always mean learning or growing. I miss providing a space where students can be comfortably uncomfortable. I probably spent an hour trying to think of what I meant by comfortably uncomfortable, because I want them to be uncomfortable, right? That's how we can grow and move. But if you're too uncomfortable, you shut off. So how do you create that space where you have a community that can grow together, right? How can we trust each other, and how can they trust me to do that? I miss giving myself, my time, my attention, my mind, my physical presence to young people who aren't my family when there's nothing in it for me. Well, I had a paycheck, but you know what I mean. I miss figuring out how to make it fun, and I miss how they make it fun. I miss figuring out how to make learning work for everyone in the room, for every person. The talkers in the quiet, the people who need time for reflection, and the lightning fast, hands in the air folks. Sometimes I worked with students who had years of experience working in schools and maybe had kids of their own, and sometimes I work with students who were just starting out at 22. I miss making mistakes in front of a group and having my students correct me. That one took me some years to get used to. I see you nodding, I know, you know. I miss the power of asking a really good question. I miss having to explain something a different way because I can tell the first way just didn't work, right? I miss graduation. I miss seeing them finish and seeing the way those new grads would come back to Alumni Day and talk to our brand new graduate students. And one group looked terrified and the other group looked like professional, right? And I miss seeing their pride and their celebration with their families as they finished and moved out into the world. Now, thinking back to when I worked in public schools, I miss the individual connections with kids. I often worked with the students for whom things weren't going great otherwise. I miss helping families and teachers understand what's happening with a kid by taking the information they already know about the kid, adding more information, and then looking at that kid as a whole. I miss how hilarious kids can be. And I miss how inspiring and powerful kids can be. So then I think about, how did teaching change me, right? How did all this time change me? And I'm going to give you some of the most drastic examples, right? I remember my first week working in schools being like, where is the stapler? How does the copier work, right? But then even moving into my end of my first year, I'm focused on, how can I tell if this kid is eligible for special education services? Which is still an important question. And then I think about, how did I evolve over time? And as I tried to write this, how did teaching change me part, I thought about, teaching really changed my whole worldview. It pulled me outside of myself. And I found myself thinking about how I ask really different questions now than I used to when I first started out. And part of that's the difference between being like 25 and being 40, right? I'd like to think that I have evolved and changed as well. So when I first started out, I think it was that, the saying, can't see the forest for the trees, right? When you're first starting, it's all the details, it's all the trees. And then as you get into working and you're working longer and longer with kids, you can step back and see the forest, right? So then as I think back to my, what am I asking myself now? Where did I finish my 12 years of working with students, and what were the questions I was asking then? So instead of something like, where's the stapler? I'm thinking, what do we want this place to be for our children? And what does that look like in practice? And how can we provide each child with the educational environment that they deserve and one that works for them? And then this one was a big one for me as I shifted how I thought about disability and difference, is how can we embrace and not just tolerate each child's differences? And how can we come to understand that our diversity of ideas, of gender, of skin color, of culture, of ability, benefits everyone, all of us. And how can we wrap our arms of love and caring around every child? So I leave us hoping that my reflection can be your reflection. And I'm going to say two of those questions again, and maybe that's something that we can think about as a congregation, is what do we want this place, this congregation, to be for our children? And what does that look like in practice? And how can we, collectively us, wrap our arms of love and caring around every child? Thank you.
I am not a professional teacher, and I have nothing but respect and admiration for those who choose to follow that career path. I do consider myself a teacher, just not a capital T teacher. I've been teaching, I'm a religious education teacher here at Willamette Falls. I've been doing this for about 17 years. In that time, it has come to mean more and more to me. It has settled deeper into my heart, feeling more like a core pillar of who I am rather than just a thing that I do. And it wasn't always this way. I think it was 2003 when my wife at the time and my daughter were church shopping. They found Atkinson Memorial Church, which was the name of this building prior to, or this congregation prior to where we are now. They attended regularly for a while. I reluctantly came along, and my firmly ex-Catholic self was very surprised to find out that I liked it. I started teaching fairly quickly thereafter. To be honest, my reasons for teaching were pretty me-focused. I wasn't very comfortable just being in a space with people. What Brené Brown calls the hustle for worthiness was a pretty big driver for me back then. I felt better if I was doing something, earning my place. Plus, teaching kindergartners seemed like a good way to learn about this whole UU thing. And once I started teaching, I just kept going. I've taught every year since then, except the one when I joined the minister search committee that brought Reverend Marcia to us. I've taught ages kindergarten through 8th, except 1st and 2nd. And I've been teaching the 7th and 8th graders for over 10 years now. Back when I started, I wasn't very connected to what was happening inside me, emotionally or psychically. So I don't think I could have really told you why I was teaching. It just felt good, gave me a place to fit in, people to talk to, a reason to be here. I needed those things then. Fortunately, I have a little more insight into myself now and can be a little more clear on the reasons I'm still teaching. A friend recently loaned me her copy of The Book of Joy, written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Just a few days ago, I read these lines from Archbishop Tutu. Our greatest joy is when we seek to do good for others. We are wired to be caring for the other and generous to one another. We shrivel when we are not able to interact. We depend on the other to be fully who we are. He spoke of the concept of Ubuntu, which means a person is a person through other persons. This is true for me. Teaching RE gives me a place where I can do good for others, and not just others, but children, where I think that good is even gooder. Doing this good for others, for the children of our community and for their parents, brings me joy. Another reason I teach is about belonging. When I sit in the sanctuary for services, I feel connected to this community. When I'm teaching, that connection is deeper. I'm not just coming to church. I am church. I'm part of what brings people here, part of what makes this community so special. There are not many places in my life where I feel I belong as fully as I do here. It was the same when I was on the board, And I imagine for folks in the choir or facilities or worship associates, volunteering here, being an active part of what makes this blessed community so blessed, reinforces again and again that I belong here, and I feel that belonging deep in my being. And what we get to teach is important. At every grade level, we get to help these wonderful children develop core values, create relationships, and explore spiritual ideas. Even when they're just having fun, they're learning how to think bigger than just themselves. They're being asked to think about ideas that can shape their spiritual selves, and they're learning again and again that they are loved by a wider community. And while all this is happening for the children, it is also happening for me. I am learning again and again that I am loved and appreciated by this community. I am being challenged to think deeper, bigger, more holistically than I am at work or in many of my friendships. I'm constantly presented with opportunities to think about my spiritual self, to talk about it, to teach it. My spiritual, relational, and social growth is encouraged right alongside that of the children that I teach. The result of all this is that teaching here strikes a chord in me that is so resonant, so broad, and so deep that it moves me just to think about it. It can be challenging sometimes. I'm not a trained teacher, and I do miss services regularly. But that is more than made up for the joy that I get being a part of my teaching team, working and learning with the children and youth, being appreciated by their parents, contributing to the emotional and spiritual energy that sustains this sacred place. Feeling this joy and belonging, feeling myself learn and grow alongside our youth, being a part of this church is so good for me. My heart is bigger, softer, and more open from this experience. So much so that when I come here for services or planning or teaching, I feel more fully myself than I do in many other parts of my life. I really debated teaching again this year. And while my head was listing the pros and cons, my heart was patiently waiting to be included in the conversation. Once it was, there wasn't any question. This year, once again, I'll be spending many Sundays in room 1 teaching RE. Thank you.
As I begin my 8th year of being your minister, I know that many of you have heard several of my stories, but I realize that I'm not sure that I've shared this one. When I was a new mom living in Rhode Island, with my wife and our toddler, I decided that I was going to go back to school and become a teacher. I was ready for a career, and teaching was appealing for a lot of reasons. I really like kids. I like school and learning, and teaching fits with parenting better than a lot of careers do. And so I got admitted to Rhode Island College and studied elementary education for 2.5 years. And if we hadn't decided to move back to Portland, I'd probably be teaching today. Now, one of the really nice things, particularly listening to Kate talk, is that I realized how much and how similar teaching and ministry really are in so many ways. Comfortably uncomfortable is exactly the same thing that we call comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. There is an acting from a place of deep integrity that happens. There are a lot of ways in which I'm mostly just doing it with adults now, but teaching is very similar to what I do. I loved the classes that I took, which often focused not just on how to teach children, but how to look at things in different ways. I took art for elementary school teachers, and I learned that drawing is really all about observation. I cannot draw to save my life from my brain. You ask me to draw a bunny rabbit and I will give you like ears and, two big balls and a little tail. It's bad. It's really bad. But if something is in front of me, I have learned how to draw it in a way that is representational. I could draw this picture and you would know it was a picture. It wouldn't be perfect, but you'd know what it was. I'll take that as a win. I learned mathematics and biology in different ways, talking about the base 10 number system as opposed to, say, base 6. And of course, I learned about educational systems and sociology and inequalities. I had to stop school when we decided to move back to Portland. We started attending First Unitarian Church downtown after jumping around several UU congregations in Rhode Island. And a few months later, they were putting out a call asking folks to consider teaching in the OWL program, which is the Our Whole Lives Sexuality Education Program. And they were asking to teach it to 8th and 9th graders. And I said, sign me up. I missed teenagers. I think that teaching sexuality education is one of the most important things we can do. I was ready. And like Greg, I found my place in the congregation doing that. I found joy and meaning in helping teenagers understand more about relationships and their own bodies and consent and sexuality. And like here, we alternated between teaching OWL and teaching coming of age at that age group. And as much as I loved teaching OWL, it was actually while teaching coming of age that I began to think seriously about ministry. See, I had been attending a Unitarian Universalist congregation on and off for about 4 years, and no one had ever told me that Unitarian Universalism was not made up in the 1960s. I had no idea of the long history of two separate religions, Unitarianism, around since the time of Jesus, and the idea that Jesus didn't claim to be divine, but instead was a prophet, and Universalism, the idea that no one was going to hell because a loving God wasn't going to damn anyone forever. We learned about Queen Isabella and her son, John Sigismund, the first Unitarian king and ruler of Transylvania in the 1500s. We learned about John Murray and Clara Barton and Susan B. Anthony. We learned about Thomas Jefferson and the Jefferson Bible, where he cut all of the miracles out. There was history here. It's amazing that it can take teaching something to really learn it, but sometimes it does. Like Greg, who learned about teaching Unitarian Universalism from teaching kindergartners. Sharing and learning with our kids and youth is a great way to learn about our faith. And it's also a great way to learn about our youth. After I got into seminary, I still taught religious education, but I moved up to being a youth advisor because it was easier to be away for 4 weeks every January. In the years that the teenagers that I had taught in 8th and 9th grade led the youth service and preached homilies was incredibly meaningful for me because I had known those kids for 5 years. I had watched them grow and get to that point where they could explain their faith in front of a giant congregation full of people. I honestly believe that each one of us makes a positive difference in other people's lives way more often than we know. And one of the things that I love the most about my job is that sometimes I get to hear that. People tell me, and that's just the best. And our teachers see that every day. They see great kids that they've spent many hours with evolve into some pretty great young adults. It is some of the most rewarding work there is. Right now, I would just like to give a pitch for educators in general. If you know teachers right now, be nice to them. Be really nice to them. There is a huge shortage of them around the country right now. Money is tight in schools. Kids have lost an average of 3 to 9 months of learning during the pandemic, and mental health issues and trauma are really high even among children. It's really hard work to be a teacher now, so be kind. Bring snacks, bring art supplies. And COVID hit our religious education program really hard. We don't have good outdoor space that belongs to us. Vaccines for kids took longer than people had hoped. Maybe families decided to be somewhere else on a Sunday morning, and that's okay. But the biggest glitch in our program right now is that we don't have enough religious education teachers. A program that is only offered every other week is a lot better than no program, and our teachers are phenomenal. And children and youth are always welcomed into the service, whether they're watching and participating or sitting with their parents reading a book or coloring or whatever. You are welcome here means everyone, all ages, whether you are capable of sitting still or not. And if anybody gives you a stink eye, I will stink eye them right back from up here, and there is power in that. But if we had more teachers, we could run our classes every week, and that would give us a consistency that we haven't had in a while, and that is a good thing. Not everyone can teach, and not everyone wants to, and that is fine. But if there is something you've heard today that speaks to you, come talk to Mary or myself. You have to have been attending for about a year, and of course you have to pass a background check. You will always be teaching with someone else. And maybe, just maybe, this is gonna make me cry, you will find yourself in a situation that I did in the summer of 2014, when I went into a Panera in Portland and ran into Natalie Malter, a young adult who had been in my youth group at First Unitarian Church. I was happy to see her, and she was happy to see me, and then she came out and gave me a hug and told me that she was starting Harvard Divinity School in the fall. I told her that I was so proud of her, and she told me that she couldn't have imagined doing it if I hadn't been her youth advisor. She said, "I knew that I could be a minister because I watched you do it." You never know what you will teach just by being yourself. Blessed be, and amen.